807 miles of road. 1,010 people died building it. 1 death for every 0.8 miles. That is the Karakoram Highway. And those numbers are not a monument. They are a measurement. The road did not follow a plan drawn by engineers. It followed the passes that merchants had chosen across centuries. The same elevations, the same valley floors, the same crossings that pack animals had worn into the ground long before anyone paved them. The Silk Road did not disappear. It lay down and became Pakistan. This journey runs north to south, from glaciers on the highway to a cliff face with 5,000 inscriptions in 5 languages, to a lake that put 12 miles of that road under 330 feet of water, to a mosque whose architect beat 43 designs from 17 countries with the shape of a Bedouin tent. Each place is evidence, not scenery. Every road eventually reaches a point where the pavement stops. What lies at the end of this one is not on any map made before the 20th century, and some of it is not on any map at all. The sound arrives before the view does. Tires grinding against granite, the road carved into a ledge that should not exist on a vertical rock face, the air thin enough at 15,000 feet that breathing requires a moment of deliberate attention. This is not a road built for convenience. 807 miles from the Punjab Plains to the Chinese border, 17 years of construction, 8,000 tons of explosives, and 1,010 people dead. 1 for every 0.8 miles of finished pavement. The Karakoram Highway does not announce itself as a feat of engineering. It announces itself as a fact of geography that someone decided to argue with. The argument was not new. The passes that the highway follows were chosen by merchants moving between China and the subcontinent from the 2nd century BCE. The same elevations, the same valley floors, the same logic of least resistance through some of the most resistant terrain on Earth. 3,000 inscriptions and 20,000 rock carvings line the route, left by travelers who used these crossings long before anyone brought asphalt. They are a guest registry for a road that did not yet exist. The Kunjarab Pass, at 15,466 feet, was selected over the Mintaka Pass in 1966. Chinese engineers judged Mintaka more vulnerable to airstrikes. The trucks that move through it today carry their own visual language. Phulpati, flower and leaf art, that covers every panel, every bumper, every inch of available surface. The tradition traces to the 1930s, when craftsmen trained in Mughal court painting lost their patronage after British colonial restructuring and moved into commercial vehicle decoration. Each truck carries a Taj, a carved wooden crown above the cab, and a system of imagery specific enough that illiterate drivers could identify their vehicle, their route, and their owner at a distance. A moving address system built from painting. At 4 in the morning, a truck driver spreads a prayer mat on the gravel shoulder, faces west, and prays before the road wakes up. Breakfast is dal chawal from a roadside dhaba. Lentils and rice, 40 cents. Eaten standing, the engine still warm. In the Waki communities along the northern section, the ritual before a long journey involves slaughtering a goat and marking the vehicle's bumper with blood, a pre-Islamic practice for appeasing mountain spirits that has survived the arrival of every subsequent faith. The markhor lives on the cliffs above the road, Pakistan's national animal, 5,000 of them in the wild, sure-footed on rock faces that no road could cross. In the 7th century, the Chinese monk Xuanzang passed through this corridor and recorded the kingdoms he found along the way. His account is still the most detailed written description of what the Silk Road looked like when it was in active use. The highway goes through. On both sides of it, the Karakoram Range does not. What those walls contain, above the road, behind the rock face, in the valleys that open only to those who leave the pavement, is where the route was always heading. Karakoram, black gravel in Turkic, named not for what it looks like from a distance, but for what it feels like underfoot. 4 peaks above 26,000 feet within 310 miles. (10,500 glaciers covering 22,510 square kilometers. The surface area of New Hampshire, frozen and stacked vertically against the sky. Only 3 passes cross it: Khunjerab, Mintaka, Kilik. That is not a choice. That is a filter. Only goods valuable enough to justify the crossing moved through here, which is why the Silk Road ran exactly where it did, and not anywhere else. The Balti porters, who supply high-altitude expeditions, carry 55 pounds above 20,000 feet for $25 to $35 a day, without supplemental oxygen, without insurance. Before crossing high passes, Waki travelers add a stone to the Buddhist cairns that still mark the routes, reading a Bismillah as they do, the Islamic invocation layered over a Buddhist practice that predates Islam in these mountains by 1,000 years. Marco Polo passed through the Pamirs in 1273 and described a sheep with horns reaching 6 feet. The Marco Polo sheep, still living at 15,000 feet on these ridges, still carrying the name of the traveler who wrote them down. Between the walls of this range there is a small gap, a meadow at the base of Nanga Parbat, the mountain that has killed more climbers than it has let through. German surveyors named it in 1934. They called it Fairy Meadows. Alpine grass, soft underfoot, a stream of glacial melt running cold and clear through the center of the meadow. Nanga Parbat fills the entire northern sky at 26,660 feet. Not a background, but a wall, close enough that the Rupal face, the highest vertical rock face on Earth at 15,092 feet, appears to lean forward. In the early morning, the Rakiot Glacier above the meadow makes a sound, a low, intermittent creak as the ice contracts in the cold. No camera picks it up. German surveyors named this place in 1934. Marchienwiese, Fairy Meadows, during an expedition that killed 9 of its members in a single storm on the slopes directly above. The name comes from a disaster. The western tragopan lives in the deodar forest along the trail that leads here. An IUCN vulnerable pheasant with between 2,500 and 9,999 individuals remaining globally. Its habitat exactly the band of elevation that the path passes through. The ecosystem that makes this meadow accessible is also one of the last intact ranges of a bird that most of the world will never see. In late August, the women of Tato village gather sea buckthorn from the forest edge below the meadow, a berry that grows at this elevation across the same arc of mountains from here to Tibet and Mongolia, dried against winter scurvy, using the same method that herders along the old Silk Road used for centuries before refrigeration existed. The men of Tato spend May through September as porters and guides on the mountain above. The summer money is stored in metal boxes under the floorboards to be opened in October. After dark, the Milky Way is unobstructed for 50 miles in every direction. No settlement large enough to produce light pollution within that radius. In the local tradition, the lake above the meadow is where the Pari, the mountain fairies, come to bathe at dusk. To see them is to go mad, or to receive prophecy. The Pari of these mountains carry the same outline as the Peri of Persian mythology and the nymphs of Greek tradition. The same figure moving through different languages along the same routes that moved silk and spice and everything else. The glacier is not white. It is gray, covered in rock debris fallen from the Rakiot face above, the dark surface absorbing heat faster than clean ice would, accelerating the melt it cannot stop. Step within 30 feet of the ice wall and the temperature drops 5 degrees Fahrenheit before you have time to register the change. Between 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, when the sun reaches the seracs directly, sections of the ice face collapse without warning. A crack that carries across the entire valley, the sound arriving before the movement has finished. Under the glacier, water moves through channels in the ice that are audible but invisible. The sound of a river that cannot be seen. The Balti call this Raikot Daria, the Raikot River. Understanding a glacier not as frozen mass, but as a river moving too slowly to watch. The same water in a different state of time. The Himalayan ibex tracks the glacier as it retreats, following the mineral licks exposed on freshly uncovered rock faces, ascending as the ice descends, grazing the chemistry of the newly revealed stone. An animal reading the glacier the way a merchant reads a road, looking for what it yields, moving toward what it opens. The herders who bring livestock to the terminal moraine do not cross it. No law prevents them. No fence marks the line. Generations of transmission have established that the moraine is where the land of people ends and the land of the mountain begins, and that has been sufficient. According to those who document these communities, the porters who work on the glacier itself come from Skardu, not from Tato, the village closest to the ice, because Tato regards the glacier as something that should not be worked on. The division of labor follows belief, not contract. When a glacier retreats, it temporarily releases more meltwater than before. The exposed surface area increases. The melt accelerates. The rivers downstream run higher. Farmers see more water and plant more crops. The abundance is real, and it is borrowed. Pakistan is currently in that borrowed period. What the Raikot carries toward the valley is not a permanent supply, but a ledger being drawn down. The balance visible only to those measuring it across decades rather than seasons. The rock inscriptions near Raikot Bridge record the passage of Buddhist pilgrims in the 3rd through 7th centuries. Travelers who used this same corridor when the ice was in a different position than it holds today. The route does not change. What surrounds it does. Seven to 10 granite pinnacles rising from the valley floor, each one a different angle of the same morning light. Sharp where the sun catches the edge, black where the shadow holds. The shape is not dramatic geology. It is the result of 100 million years of being attacked. The Karakoram batholith granite, harder than the metamorphic rock around it, still standing after the ice and wind stripped everything softer away. What looks like a cathedral is what remains when the surrounding stone has been removed. Tupopdan, the highest of the group at 20,033 feet, is called that in Wakhi. Tupo, sun, Dan, mountain. The mountain that meets the sun first. Not a sacred name, a practical one. The Wakhi are here because the Silk Road broke. Their language is Iranian, related to Persian, carried from the Wakhan Corridor, the narrow strip connecting Central Asia to the subcontinent, when Russian and later Soviet pressure closed that passage between 1870 and 1948. Chirpy, yak cheese, salt-cured, dried until it is hard enough to knock on a table, costing 50 cents, requires no refrigeration, no cooking, no preparation. It is exactly the food a person carries over a pass. What looks like stillness from below is in motion. What looks flat and safe is what surges. The water coming off this ice fills the lake ahead, a lake that has no natural right to exist here, created by a landslide that killed 20 people and buried a village under 300 feet of water. At 6 in the morning, the lake surface is flat enough to reflect the Pasu cones inverted, the real pinnacles and their mirror image indistinguishable from the right angle. By 10, the color has shifted from cobalt to turquoise. Glacial rock flowers suspended in the water column refracting blue light, the same mechanism that makes glacial lakes this color everywhere on Earth. By afternoon, the surface goes lavender. 30 to 50 feet down, on a clear day when the light hits at the right angle, the asphalt of the Karakoram Highway is still visible on the lake floor. Brown trout swim above it. On the 4th of January, 2010, at roughly 4 in the morning, approximately 50 million cubic meters of rock fell into the Hunza River. Each morning, at least one of them sets out over the coordinates where his house used to stand. The older residents can identify rooftops through the water on sunny days. They do not point them out to visitors. On the 4th of January each year, the community performs the Fatiha prayer facing the water rather than toward Mecca, because the people they are praying for are under the surface, not in a direction. The brown trout in the lake were not introduced. They established themselves in the cold, clear, oxygen-rich water that the river below never provided. An ecology created by accident, thriving in a habitat that did not exist before the disaster that made it. The walnut trees on the upper bank were the trees growing above houses that are now underwater. The trees are still alive. The houses are not. The Silk Road passed through this gorge for 2,000 years before the highway covered it. The highway passed through for 35 years before the lake covered it. The lake has been here 15. Whatever comes next will pass through too. The Hunza River below is gray, not the turquoise of Atabad, but the gray of glacial silt moving fast, white foam where it hits the boulders, the sound continuous and loud enough to fill the whole valley. The Hussaini Suspension Bridge is 635 feet long, held by 6 main rope cables, and has 472 wooden planks, 73 of which are broken or missing, according to those who have counted them. It sways 2 to 3 feet with each step at the midpoint. Built around 1968 from surplus wire rope, left over from Karakoram highway construction, it was damaged in the floods that followed the Atabad landslide in 2010. The community rebuilt it afterward using timber from collapsed houses. No engineers, no drawings. Condé Nast Traveler named it one of the most dangerous bridges in the world in 2013. Children cross it every morning to reach school on the other side. The brown dipper nests under the bridge planks in the shade of the rope cables, a small bird that walks along the bottom of the Hunza River hunting insect larvae, the only creature that uses the bridge as a home rather than a crossing. In the Shina language, according to some accounts, the bridge is called Larzanda Pul, the shaking bridge. There is a story told in Husseini about a woman who crossed during a night flood with a sick child in her arms, and no one watching. And no one has ever explained why the bridge held that night when it should not have. The story is not offered as miracle. It is offered as the reason the bridge is still there. On the Husseini side, one dhaba serves doodh patty, milk tea boiled down without water until it is near syrup, 25 cents, served at 180 degrees Fahrenheit. You wait 15 minutes to drink it. The Silk Road did not require perfect infrastructure. It required infrastructure sufficient to survive the crossing being made today, and nothing more. What the bridge offers is exactly that. No guarantee past the current step, no promise of what the next plank will hold. And enough people have trusted it long enough that it still stands. Across the river, the valley opens and the air warms slightly. The approach to a place where the road stopped long enough to leave something behind. Rakaposhi, at 25,551 feet, catches the sun 30 minutes before the valley floor does. The upper snowfields turning orange, then gold, then white as the light descends, by which time Karimabad, at 7,546 feet, is only beginning to wake. The glacier melt channels that run through the terraced fields make a sound audible throughout the town 24 hours a day. Water engineered by gravity into exactly the places the crops need it. A system whose maintenance schedules are held in collective memory rather than in any written document, allocated by jirga the same way they have been since the 18th century. With very few disputes. In April, the apricot orchards turn the entire valley white with blossom. In July, the fruit is split and laid on flat rooftops to dry. 21 varieties, the kernels pressed for oil that cooks with, conditions hair, waterproofs leather, and was moving along the Silk Road as a trade good by the 5th century. Baltit Fort has stood above Karimabad for roughly 1,200 years in its various iterations. Its construction technique a physical record of the route it controlled. Daji Dewari, timber framing from Central Asia. Wooden balconies in a Tibetan style. Colored glass windows added during the Mughal period. 3 civilizations that traveled through here left their methods in a single building. At Ganesh Village, below the fort, More than 5,000 inscriptions cover the rock faces along the old caravan path. Texts in Kharosthi, Brahmi, Sanskrit, Sogdian, and Chinese, dated from the 2nd through 8th centuries. They are a guest registry for a road that ran here for 600 years. Travelers recorded their names, their prayers, their passage, in whatever language they carried. Golden eagles with wingspans reaching 7.5 feet hunt above the terraced fields. Marmots, hares, young ibex. The Silk Road did not just pass through Hunza Valley. It sat down here, left things behind, and moved on. South and west, where the route descends into valleys the outside world has barely named, those deposits become harder to read and more specific to find. At the point called Domail, the Neelam River arrives from the left, blue, clear, carrying glacial melt from the Kashmir highlands. The Jhelum arrives from the right, gray-brown, carrying sediment from lower ground. Early morning fog fills the valley floor, and only the hilltops and the red tiled roofs push through. The Red Fort, Ruta Kila, in Pahari, sits on a laterite rock outcrop above the confluence, construction begun by the Chak dynasty in 1559 and completed by Sultan Muzaffar Khan in 1646, spanning 87 years and 3 ruling dynasties. From the fort walls, both rivers are visible simultaneously, along with the Medina Market and the bridge. The same strategic view that made this specific promontory worth 87 years of construction across 3 separate regimes. At 6 in the morning, the Medina Market assembles produce from 3 climate zones on a single row of stalls. Mangoes from the Punjab plains, apples from the Neelam Valley, dried apricots from Hunza. The geography of the Silk Road compressed into a single market. The founding legend says Sultan Muzaffar Khan followed a white falcon from the plains into the mountains, and where the bird landed on the rock above the confluence, he built. The white falcon as directional sign appears in Mughal and Timurid tradition, a logic that traveled the same routes as the trade. East from here, the road climbs over the Rishian Pass at 9,400 feet, into a valley that most maps barely name. The valley Pakistanis call Little Switzerland, where the Silk Road left something in the soil that still grows. Cold air drains into the bowl-shaped valley overnight and sits there until mid-morning. A white layer of mist covering the valley floor, while the upper slopes are already in sun. The Deodar cedar forest rising from 3,000 feet through the tree line and into the snowfields above. In September, the apple orchards fill the valley with a smell that is difficult to describe to someone who has not been inside it. Warm fruit and cold air together, specific to this altitude and this season. The streams are clear enough to count the stones on the bottom. The houses here are built from deodar cedar, with roofs pitched at 45 to 60 degrees. The angle calculated not for appearance, but for the weight of snow they must shed each winter. Some of these structures are 150 to 200 years old. The walls are 18 to 24 inches thick, which keeps the interior between 50 and 59 degrees Fahrenheit year-round without any mechanical assistance. The valley's white honey, safed shihad, comes from beehives placed in the late-blooming wildflower fields above the orchards. The cold slows the flowering, concentrating the nectar differently. A pale, mild honey that follows a Kashmir trading corridor going back to at least the 7th century. The founding story of Reshian Pass, that a giant split the mountain with a single blow, the water filling the valley like a lake before draining away and leaving the fertile floor, matches the geological record of glacial lake formation and drainage, a process that ended roughly 10,000 years ago. The story is thousands of years old. The geology is older. Lipa has been closed twice in recent decades by events it did not cause. The Kargil conflict in 1999 and the revocation of Article 370 in 2019. Each time, the valley's inaccessibility preserved it. By late afternoon, cooking smoke rises from the cedar rooftops and blends into the mountain mist. No sound except wind and water. The Silk Road passed through the places it needed and left others untouched. What was left untouched here has stayed intact in ways that the route itself could not. Downhill from here, a river runs a color that does not look real until you are standing next to it. The Neelum River is turquoise, not as a description, but as a fact of physics. Glacial meltwater carries rock flour, particles smaller than 0.002 of a millimeter, suspended in the water column, refracting light at the blue-green wavelength. During the monsoon, sediment turns it brown. During the dry season, it returns to turquoise. The color follows a geological calendar, not a human one. At the village of Karen, wooden houses lean over the riverbank close enough that their reflections sit on the water below them, laundry lines crossing between windows, children on the rocks at the edge where the current slows. The Neelum Valley runs for 124 miles along the line of control, the military boundary between Pakistan-administered and Indian-administered Kashmir. The Kashmir stag, the hangal, is critically endangered with fewer than 300 individuals remaining globally. Its range includes the dense forest on the valley's eastern edge, where the line of control has unintentionally created a no-hunting buffer zone on the Indian side. A military boundary that no ecologist designed is doing conservation work that no wildlife program has funded. At the northern end of the valley, at 6,499 feet, the ruins of Sharda Peeth sit largely unprotected on a stone platform 22 feet wide and 16 feet high. When the first snow falls in Neelam Valley, schools close without official announcement. The mountain signals a holiday that no calendar marks. Families cook harissa overnight. Wheat and mutton slow-cooked for 6 to 8 hours, finished with clarified butter and cinnamon, eaten as breakfast the morning after the first snowfall. The local tradition holds that a guardian spirit protects the Sharda ruins, that those who see the site and remain silent will dream of where ancient manuscripts are hidden. The legend functions practically. Silence is the correct approach, and the tradition of silence has protected the site more reliably than any physical barrier. The road climbs out of the valley floor toward 12,000 feet. The trees thin. The sound of the river falls away. Above the last pass, there is a lake that does not appear on most world maps. The people of Kashmir call it the Mirror of Heaven. The name is not a boast. It is an instruction about how to look at it. At 7 in the morning, the lake surface holds a complete inverted image of the Cirque walls. 300 to 600 feet of rock face, reflected without distortion, the real cliff, and it's double indistinguishable from where the trail ends at the water's edge. The Cirque opens on the southern side only, framing the descent toward the Neelam Valley below like a window cut into the rock. The geometry of the amphitheater walls concentrates sound in a way that allows a normal speaking voice to carry across the full width of the lake without being raised. The alpine meadow between the trail and the water holds aconite, gentian, primula, plants that Dioscorides described in De Materia Medica in 77 CE and attributed to Eastern origins. The same plants were moving along Silk Road pharmaceutical trade routes by the 2nd century, dried and packed into the same loads that carried silk and spice. This meadow was a source. The Himalayan monal pheasant lives in the rock above the water. The male's plumage shifts through copper, blue, and violet, depending on the angle of light, 9 colors in a single bird. The feathers were a luxury trade good that reached the Tang dynasty court through the same network that carried everything else of value from this part of the world. In June, Gujar herders arrive with between 40 and 80 cattle, following trails that predate the tourist infrastructure by generations. They hold customary grazing rights under pre-partition law that has not been superseded. They use the same path as the trekkers, camp on the same shore, and will remain after the season closes and the road snows in. Their annual income is produced here in a single summer. Desi ghee made from the milk of cattle grazing this meadow, carried down to Neelam Bazaar at the end of the season. The economy of this lake is still measured in clarified butter. The name in Urdu is Jannat Ka Aina, mirror of heaven. The physics that produces the mirror effect is the same glacial cirque geometry that carved the basin. Impermeable rock walls, no river inlet delivering sediment, zero turbidity, a surface that holds whatever is above it without distortion. The legend says that on the full moon night of August, the Pari come to bathe in the reflection, not in the lake itself. Those who see the reflection directly will sleep for 3 days and wake knowing where the underground springs run. The sleep is not a punishment. It is the price of the knowledge. South from this elevation, the mountains fall away into a city that turned the Silk Road into marble, into minarets, into a capital that still holds the shape of every empire that passed through it. The Margala Hills hold the city from the north, Deodar and Oak up to 5,889 feet, the ridge visible from almost every intersection in the grid below. On Trail 3 at 6:30 in the morning, the calls of babblers and mynas fill the canopy before the sun clears the ridge. From there, the Adhan from Faisal Mosque, 3 miles south, carries across the open slope without a building to interrupt it. Indian peafowl cross the path ahead of the first joggers. Inside Sector E7, the village of Saidpur predates the city by 5 centuries. It is mentioned in the Ain-e-Akbari, the Mughal administrative record of 1598. A Hindu temple, a Sikh stepwell, and a mosque occupy the same alley. Weekly puja is performed at the temple, observed most often by visitors who do not practice Hinduism. The glass towers of the new city surround it on every side. Saidpur did not move. The capital was built around it. Karahi gosht, goat or mutton, cooked in a steel wok with tomatoes, ginger, and dried chilies, comes from the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Afghan borderlands, carried south through the Silk Road's northwest corridor. "22 miles northwest, Taxila holds Greek, Persian, Buddhist, and Parthian architecture in adjacent ruins. The place the Silk Road ran through before it ran through anything Islamabad now covers. The capital inherited the location without inheriting the memory. What came before is still there, 22 miles away, a UNESCO site most visitors to Islamabad do not visit because no sign on the highway suggests they should. "5:30 in the morning in December. The marble courtyard is 28 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to feel through the soles of shoes. 4 minarets at 286 feet each stand lit against a sky that has not yet decided to be blue. The light from the towers white and sharp in the pre-dawn air. Breath becomes visible. In 1966, King Faisal bin Abdulaziz of Saudi Arabia pledged the funding for a national mosque in Pakistan's new capital. The design competition drew 43 entries from 17 countries. The winner was Vedat Dalokay, a Turkish architect from Sivas, who submitted not a dome but a tent. 8 concrete faces rising to a point. The shape of a Bedouin dwelling translated into a structure capable of holding 10,000 people inside and 40,000 in the courtyard. Dalokay's argument was theological. The dome is a Byzantine and Roman form absorbed by early Islamic builders. It does not appear in the Quran as a requirement. The tile panels were a gift from the Turkish government. Iznik tile of the same type that lines Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. King Faisal was assassinated in 1975. Construction began in 1976. The mosque was completed in 1986, 11 years after its patron died. He did not see the opening. On the 27th night of Ramadan, Laylat al-Qadr, more than 100,000 people gather across the courtyard and the approaches. The Margala hills behind the mosque act as a natural acoustic reflector, projecting the sound of the outdoor speakers 3 to 4 miles south. Reaching Saidpur village, where the Hindu temple in Sector E7 holds its weekly puja. One night each year, both sounds occupy the same acoustic zone. The mosque was the largest in the world from 1986 to 1993, 7 years. For 7 years, it was the reference point. The carpet covers 107,000 square feet in a single continuous piece. At dusk, rose-ringed parakeets, a flock of 20 to 50, roost in the courtyard trees, indifferent to the architecture below them, using the minaret shadows for thermal cover. The building, designed by a Turkish architect, funded by a Saudi king, built in a city planned by a Greek at the southern end of a road from China, does not need to announce what it is. Somewhere to the north, 400 miles and 15,000 feet up, the Khunjerab Pass is already dark. The road that became this mosque never ended. The Karakoram Highway follows the same valley floors that merchants chose 2,000 years before anyone poured asphalt over them. 8 centuries of footsteps before the asphalt. The same river it followed then. The surface changed. The logic did not. The Silk Road did not disappear. It became the ground. It became the passes that the highway follows, the inscriptions still in the rock at Ganesh, the language in Hunza that no linguist can explain, the tent-shaped mosque at the foot of the Margala Hills, designed by a man from Turkey, funded by a king from Arabia, built in a city planned by a Greek. A road that stops is not a road that ends. It is a road that became somewhere. Which stop on this journey stayed with you the longest, and why? Tell us below. Thank you for traveling with us through every mile of this journey. Your time means everything to us. God bless you, God bless your family, and God bless every journey you take. If this journey touched your heart, share it with your family, your friends, anyone who deserves to experience this. Subscribe and join us for the next one. We have special gifts waiting for you down the road.